November 24th, 1944, 1:12 a.m. Industrial District, eastern edge of Tokyo. The night air is cold enough to sting exposed skin. A faint mist drifts between factory rooftops, clinging to chimneys that rise like dark pillars against a sky washed pale by distant starlight. Somewhere beyond the Sumida River, the muted hum of generators vibrates through concrete and steel. Inside the sprawling Nakajima Aircraft Company plant, rows of workbenches glow beneath hanging lamps. Sparks leap in brief flashes as metal is cut and shaped for another day of production. Lieutenant Kenjiro Takahashi of the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service leans against a railing on the second-floor walkway, arms folded. His uniform jacket is open at the collar despite the chill. Below him, machinists in grease-stained coveralls move with quiet precision. The rhythm of industry feels steady, reassuring. He listens to the deep, almost comforting rumble of assembly machinery and allows himself a thin smile. "The Americans cannot reach this far," he says aloud, though no one has asked. His voice carries just enough authority to quiet a nearby conversation. Sergeant Hiroshi Endo looks up from a crate of instrument housings and nods automatically. The assumption has been repeated for months, drilled into briefings and casual talk alike. Distance, after all, is a form of defense. The vastness of the Pacific has swallowed fleets and men. Surely it will swallow bombers as well. Outside, a patrol truck rattles past the factory gates. Its headlights cut pale arcs through drifting fog. Private First Class Masato Saito sits in the passenger seat, gloved hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. He stares at the empty sky above the rooftops. Somewhere to the west lies the dark expanse of ocean, then more ocean beyond that. The thought of enemy aircraft crossing such distances feels absurd, like imagining ghosts walking across water. At the same moment, nearly 2,000 kilometers away, the flight deck of the aircraft carrier USS Saratoga trembles under the force of engines spinning to life. Ground crews wave illuminated wands through swirling prop wash. The scent of aviation fuel mixes with salt air. Major Robert W. Morgan of the United States Army Air Forces climbs into the cockpit of a silver B-29 Super Fortress, serial number 4-2-24557. His gloved fingers move across familiar switches. Fuel mixture, magnetos, oxygen flow. The bomber's right. 3350. Duplex cyclone engines cough, once then roar awake in thunderous unison. Vibrations ripple through the fuselage like a living pulse. In the dim red glow of instrument lights, Flight Engineer Technical Sergeant Leonard McPherson watches engine gauges stabilize. He taps one dial with a knuckle, listening to the steady beat beneath the glass. "Looks good, Sir," McPherson says over the intercom. Static crackles faintly in his headset. Morgan nods, though no one can see him clearly. "We go in high," he replies. 28,000 feet. Keep her steady." You can hear the wind already rushing along aluminum skin. The aircraft trembles as brakes release. Ahead, a line of runway lights stretches into darkness like a promise or a threat. For the men aboard, distance has become a challenge rather than a barrier. New fuel calculations, improved navigation systems, and sheer determination have transformed geography into something negotiable. Back in Tokyo, Lieutenant Takahashi descends a staircase and steps into the night. He tilts his head upward, scanning the silent sky. Stars flicker faintly through low cloud. Somewhere a train whistles long and lonely. The city breathes in its sleep. Rows of wooden houses stand shoulder to shoulder, their tiled roofs gleaming with dew. Captain Shigeru Nakamura of the Tokyo Air Defense Command stands on the roof of a nearby operations building, binoculars slung around his neck. A portable radar unit hums beside him, its rotating antenna slicing circles through the mist. The device is new imported from German designs and still temperamental. Tonight, its screen shows only faint echoes of weather patterns and the occasional drifting bird. Nothing. Nakamura mutters. He glances at his watch. 1:26 a.m. Routine patrol schedules run through his mind like a checklist. Fighter squadrons remain on standby at Tachikawa Airfield. Searchlights are powered down to conserve energy. Ammunition stores are secure. Every procedure suggests calm, yet far above the Pacific. 29 formations stretch across the night sky in loose, deliberate patterns. Their polished wings reflect moonlight in fleeting flashes. Navigator Lieutenant Harold Henson leans over his chart's pencil, tracing a path toward the coordinates memorized weeks earlier. Beneath him, the ocean appears as a vast black canvas, broken only by faint white crests of waves. "You think they know we're coming?" Hansen asks quietly. Morgan exhales slowly. "They believe we can't." That belief hangs in the air like another piece of equipment, invisible but heavy. It shapes decisions on both sides of the conflict. In Tokyo, factory supervisors approve extended shifts, confident production will continue uninterrupted. Fire brigades conduct routine inspections, checking hoses and ladders with methodical care. No one imagines that within hours, these same tools will become instruments of desperate survival. In a dim control room, radio operator Corporal Tetsuya Mori adjusts the frequency dial of his transmitter. Static fills the speakers with a soft, constant hiss. He jots down routine signals from coastal observation posts. Clear skies, normal shipping activity, no unusual sounds detected. Each message reinforces the illusion of safety. The night deepens. Clouds thin slightly, revealing a pale arc of moon. Over distant waters, the American bombers climb steadily, engines droning with relentless purpose. The formation tightens. Bomb bays remain closed for now, their deadly cargo suspended in mechanical stillness. You can almost feel the altitude pressing against the aircraft hull, hear the subtle groan of metal under strain. Inside the cockpit, breath fogs against oxygen masks. Every man aboard senses the magnitude of what lies ahead, though no one speaks of it directly. On the ground, Lieutenant Takahashi turns away from the sky at last. He walks back toward the factory doors, boots echoing on damp pavement. Behind him, the radar antenna continues its slow rotation, painting empty circles on a screen that promises reassurance. At this moment, no one believes disaster is minutes away. The first indication arrives not as thunder or flame, but as a whisper buried in static. At 2:03 a.m., Corporal Tetsuya Mori straightens in his chair inside the Tokyo Air Defense radio room. A faint signal flickers across his receiver, then vanishes. He twists the tuning dial with careful fingers, jaw tightening. The speaker produces only a low rushing sound, like distant wind through trees. "Unidentified transmission," he mutters, scribbling the time into his logbook. Across the room, Lieutenant Saburo Kitagawa looks up from a map spread across a long wooden table. He has spent the past hour tracing patrol routes with a grease pencil, adjusting them according to fuel limitations and pilot fatigue reports. The notion of American aircraft reaching Tokyo remains in his mind a theoretical possibility rather than an imminent threat. Probably atmospheric interference, Kitagawa says. His voice is calm, almost dismissive. He taps the edge of the table with a gloved hand. "Continue monitoring." Outside the radar antenna, atop the operations building, continues its steady sweep through damp air. Captain Shigeru Nakamura leans over the glowing screen. A small, indistinct smudge appears for an instant near the outer range line. He blinks, adjusts focus, and watches it fade into the background noise. "Faulty echo," he concludes quietly. "The equipment has been unreliable for weeks." Technicians have warned about calibration errors caused by humidity and inconsistent power supply. Replacement parts are scarce. Each anomaly is easier to explain away than to investigate fully. Far above the Pacific, the B-29 superfortresses hold formation at 28,000 feet. Major Robert Morgan's aircraft shudders slightly as it passes through a band of turbulent air. The horizon ahead carries the faintest glow of approaching land. Navigator Lieutenant Harold Hansen glances down at his chronometer. Landfall in 18 minutes, Hansen reports. In the rear compartment, bombardier Captain William Price adjusts the Norden bomb sight. He peers through the small optical window, though at this altitude, the surface below remains a blur of shadow. He imagines the industrial grids and rail yards described during mission briefings, targets chosen for their strategic importance. The memory of maps and aerial photographs sharpens his focus. "Bomb load secure," Price says into the intercom. You can hear the engines now, their combined roar, a constant presence that seeps into thought itself. The smell of hot oil and metal lingers in every corner of the aircraft. Frost forms along the edges of a window's delicate crystals, trembling with each vibration. Back in Tokyo, a coastal observation post at Choshi struggles to maintain radio contact. Private Yoshio Tanaka cups his headphones against the wind. He believes he hears a distant mechanical hum above the surf, a sound that does not belong to fishing boats or merchant vessels. Possible aircraft, he transmits. The signal breaks into fragments as it travels inland. In the Tokyo operations room, Mori receives the message as a burst of garbled syllables. He reconstructs the meaning with effort, heart rate quickening. Lieutenant Kitagawa reads the note, then folds it once and sets it aside. American reconnaissance at most, Kitagawa says. They cannot sustain bombing operations at this range. Confidence rests on assumptions about fuel capacity, navigation limits, and crew endurance. Reports from earlier in the war have reinforced the idea that American heavy bombers lack the reach to threaten the home islands in force. Training doctrines emphasize interception near coastal approaches rather than deep interior defense. At Tachikawa Airfield, Captain Hiroto Aizawa walks along a row of Mitsubishi Ki-45 Toryu night fighters. Mechanics move like shadows beneath wing lights, checking ammunition belts and hydraulic lines. The runway is slick with dew. Aizawa pauses beside his aircraft, glancing at the sky with mild irritation. "Stand by, alert again," he says to his gunner, Sergeant Minoru Kato. They chase phantoms. Kato shrugs, tightening the strap on his helmet. He has flown countless patrols that ended in nothing more dramatic than fuel exhaustion and quiet landings. The notion of a massive American raid remains distant, almost abstract. Meanwhile, the first formation of B-29 bombers crosses the Japanese coastline. Their silhouettes pass above fishing villages where lanterns sway in gentle wind. Below, farmers asleep in wooden homes dream of ordinary concerns. No sirens sound, no searchlights pierce the sky. You can sense the invisible line being crossed, a boundary defined by belief rather than geography. The bombers advance with deliberate precision, guided by radio beacons and dead reckoning. Each mile erodes the illusion of safety that has shielded the capital for so long. At 2:31 a.m., Captain Nakamura notices the radar screen flicker again. This time, the smudge holds shape for several rotations. He calls for a technician. The young specialist adjusts voltage levels, wipes condensation from the display glass, and studies the pattern with growing unease. "Multiple contacts," the technician whispers. Nakamura feels a chill unrelated to the weather. He reaches for his binoculars, scanning the moonlit sky. Nothing appears beyond drifting cloud. The silence is profound, almost mocking. Inside the radio room, Mori receives another coastal report, clearer. Clearer now. Engines overhead, large number. Direction west to east. He hands the message to Lieutenant Kitagawa, who reads it twice. Doubt flickers across his face, then fades beneath discipline. Prepare. Advisory. Kitagawa orders. No general alarm yet. The decision buys time that cannot be reclaimed. High above, Major Morgan adjusts course, slightly aligning his formation with the glow of Tokyo's industrial outskirts. The city appears as a faint constellation of light stretching toward the horizon. He tightens his grip on the control yoke, feeling the weight of altitude and expectation pressing inward. At this moment, you might think surely they must know, but the night below remains quiet, its guardians uncertain whether to believe their own instruments. The warning signs accumulate like distant thunder heard yet unacknowledged. At 2:47 a.m., the first sound reaches Tokyo as a tremor rather than a roar. It is subtle at first, a low vibration that slips between buildings and settles into the bones of those who happen to be awake. A machinist stepping outside for fresh air pauses with his cigarette halfway to his lips. He frowns, listening. Somewhere above the cloud layer, engines beat against the sky in steady, relentless rhythm. Captain Shigeru Nakamura grips the edge of the radar console. The screen now shows several defined returns moving with deliberate consistency toward the heart of the city. His pulse quickens. For the first time that night, the thought forms with undeniable clarity. They are real. Signal Tachikawa. Immediately, Nakamura orders. His voice cuts through the control room like a blade. Technicians scramble toward telephones and radio transmitters, hands shaking despite training drilled into muscle memory. Across town, Lieutenant Kenjiro Takahashi feels the vibration through the soles of his boots. He steps into the factory courtyard and tilts his head upward. The mist has thinned, stars flicker faintly. Then carried on cold wind comes the unmistakable droning of heavy aircraft. His confidence falters not in panic, but in sudden disorienting disbelief. They cannot be here, he murmurs. Yet the sound grows stronger, multiplying, as though the sky itself is awakening. Workers gather in small clusters, faces turned upward. Someone laughs nervously. Someone else mutters a prayer. The factory siren remains silent, its operator awaiting official confirmation. High above, Major Robert Morgan peers through the windshield of his B-29 Superfortress. The city lights spread beneath him in intricate patterns, rail lines glimmering like threads of silver. He senses the tension among his crew even through the intercom's silence. Navigator Harold Hansen confirms the final approach vector. Bombardier William Price adjusts altitude settings on the bomb site, eyes narrowing in concentration. The aircraft formation stretches across kilometers of sky, each bomber maintaining precise spacing despite turbulence and biting cold. You can feel the thinness of the air at this height. Hear the subtle creak of pressurized compartments. Every instrument needle carries meaning. Every flicker of radio static suggests risk. At Tachikawa Airfield, Captain Hiroto Aizawa receives the scramble order at 2:52 a.m. He sprints across the damp runway toward his Mitsubishi Ki 45 Toryu. Ground crews yank away wheel chocks and spin propellers by hand. Engines cough, sputter, then ignite with harsh metallic growls. Altitude estimate. Aizawa shouts to the operations officer. Unknown. Possibly extreme high level, comes the reply. The uncertainty weighs heavier than any confirmed threat. Japanese night fighters have trained for interceptions at lower altitudes where searchlights and visual cues guide pursuit. Engaging bombers flying above 25,000 feet demands performance margins that push aircraft and pilots alike toward their limits. Meanwhile, Tokyo's civil defense network begins to stir. Fire Brigade Lieutenant Masaru Hoshino unlocks equipment sheds, checking hose couplings and pump motors. He glances toward the sky, heart pounding as the engine noise intensifies. Just reconnaissance, he tells his men, though he no longer believes it. At 2:59 a.m., the first searchlights snap on. Brilliant white beams spear upward, slicing through cloud fragments in desperate arcs. Their sudden brilliance transforms the night into a shifting theater of shadow and glare. For a moment, nothing appears within their reach. Then one beam catches a fleeting metallic flash far above. Gasps ripple through the streets. Children wake and begin to cry. Elderly residents shuffle onto balconies, clutching blankets around thin shoulders. The sense of distance that once protected them now feels like a cruel illusion dissolving in real time. Inside his cockpit, Morgan watches the searchlight cones probing the darkness below. He exhales slowly. The enemy has seen them at last. All aircraft maintain course, he transmits over the formation frequency. His voice remains steady, though his grip tightens on the controls. Anti-aircraft batteries around the city awaken with thunderous force. The first shells burst at altitudes well below the bomber's blossoms of orange flame that fade into drifting smoke. Gunners adjust elevation, frantically calculating trajectories against targets barely visible. On the ground, Lieutenant Takahashi flinches as the sky erupts in scattered flashes. The factory siren finally wails, its rising note filled with urgency that cannot be mistaken. Workers run for shelter. Machinery grinds to a halt. Somewhere glass shatters from concussion alone. Captain Aizawa's fighter lifts from the runway at 3:04 a.m., wheels retracting as he climbs into darkness. His engine strains at full throttle. Frost begins to form along the canopy edges. He searches for visual contact with shapes he has never truly expected to encounter. You can sense the collision of belief and reality unfolding in every action. Training meets uncertainty. Confidence meets cold in different altitude. Above Tokyo, the formation of B-29 bombers continues its inexorable advance. Bomb bay doors remain closed for now, yet their presence feels like a promise suspended in metal and gravity. The night has changed. The unexpected has become undeniable. At 3:09 a.m., the sky above Tokyo becomes a battlefield of light and noise. Searchlight beams cross and tangle in frantic patterns, illuminating drifting smoke from anti-aircraft bursts that still detonate far below their intended targets. The gunners struggle to calculate altitude with precision. Range finders fog in the cold. Communication lines crackle with conflicting data. Every adjustment feels both urgent and uncertain. Captain Hiroto Aizawa forces his Mitsubishi Ki-45 higher engine roaring in protest. The aircraft shudders as it climbs beyond the altitude for which it was comfortably designed. Beside him, Sergeant Minoru Kato peers through the canopy, eyes straining against darkness and thin air. Nothing yet, Kato reports through clenched teeth. Below them, the city spreads in a grid of pale illumination and deep shadow. Sirens wail continuously, now their sound rising and falling like waves against a shore. Fire brigade units race through narrow streets, headlights bouncing across wooden facades and shuttered shop fronts. Lieutenant Masaru Hoshino grips the side rail of his truck as it jolts over tram tracks. "Stay calm," he shouts to the crew. "We are prepared." Yet even as he speaks, he feels a tightening in his chest. Prepared for what exactly? High above, Major Robert Morgan steadies the B-29 as turbulence ripples through the formation. The bomber's massive wings flex with each gust. Engine temperatures fluctuate. Flight engineer Leonard McPherson watches gauges with intense concentration, adjusting mixture controls in small, deliberate increments. Cylinder 3 running hot. McPherson warns. Morgan nods. "Hold it together," he replies. "We are almost there." Navigator Harold Hansen confirms the approach line toward the industrial quarter. Through gaps in cloud, faint clusters of light reveal factory complexes and rail yards identified during briefing sessions. The scale of the city becomes unmistakable. It stretches beyond the limits of peripheral vision, a living organism unaware of the full weight bearing down upon it. You can hear the intercom hiss with background static, feel the press of oxygen mask against skin. Every breath tastes faintly metallic. At Tokyo Air Defense Command, Lieutenant Saburo Kitagawa studies incoming reports with growing frustration. Radar contacts now appear as a dense formation rather than scattered echoes. Telephone operators relay fragmented messages from coastal posts and inner districts alike. How many aircraft, Kitagawa demands? Unknown, a technician replies. Possibly dozens. The number sounds impossible. Doctrine has long assumed that even if enemy bombers reach the home islands, they would arrive in small groups, harassed by weather and fuel limits. The idea of a concentrated strike force challenges months of strategic planning. Kitagawa hesitates, then issues a partial evacuation order for selected industrial zones. The decision feels measured rational, yet it arrives minutes later than ideal. Messages move through bureaucratic channels before reaching local authorities, losing urgency with each relay. Meanwhile, Captain Nakamura orders anti-aircraft batteries to increase firing altitude. Shells begin to burst closer to the bomber formation, dark puffs surrounded by brief halos of flame. The concussion jolts aircraft, rattling instruments and nerves alike. Inside Morgan's cockpit, Bombardier William Price grips the bomb site controls. He senses the vibration of nearby detonations through the metal frame. Flak is getting closer, Price says quietly. Morgan glances toward the glowing horizon of the city below. Stay on target, he answers. Below. Captain Aizawa finally glimpses movement above the searchlight beams. A shape passes across the moonlit sky, vast and silver. For a heartbeat, he cannot comprehend its scale. Then recognition strikes with chilling force. American heavy bomber Aizawa breathes. He pushes the throttle forward despite the engine's strained protest. The Ki-45 climbs further wings, trembling at the edge of aerodynamic stability. Machine guns remain silent for now. Range is still too great. Altitude difference remains daunting. On the ground, Lieutenant Takahashi stands among a crowd gathered outside the factory gates. His earlier confidence has evaporated, replaced by rigid focus. He watches the anti-aircraft fire streak upward in futile arcs. They fly above our reach, someone whispers. Takahashi says nothing. He feels the truth settling into him like cold rain. Fire brigade units take positions near reservoirs and hydrants. Hoses are uncoiled. Pump engines are primed. Lieutenant Hoshino scans rooftops for signs of impact, half expecting the threat to pass without consequence. He clings to that hope even as the engine noise overhead multiplies into a continuous, overwhelming presence. In the bomber formation, Major Morgan receives confirmation that secondary groups have aligned on parallel attack paths. The operation is unfolding with mechanical precision. Each aircraft follows pre-arranged timing sequences, trusting instruments and training more than visual cues. You can sense the moment stretching thin between anticipation and action. Every participant, whether in cockpit or on pavement, feels suspended within it. At 3:18 a.m., searchlight beams converge on one bomber long enough for anti-aircraft gunners to concentrate their fire. Explosions blossom dangerously close. Shrapnel rattles against aluminum skin like hail. McPherson curses under his breath as a warning light flickers briefly. Minor damage, he reports. Systems holding. Morgan does not reply. His attention remains fixed on the approach point, now visible as a darker mass amid city lights. Below, evacuation efforts falter as conflicting instructions reach district wardens. Some residents move toward shelters, while others remain in place, uncertain which authority to trust. The delay costs precious minutes that cannot be recovered. Captain Aizawa closes distance with the bomber's silhouette at last. He steadies his aircraft finger, hovering near the trigger. The enormity of the target fills his vision. The belief that distance guaranteed safety has already begun to collapse. Now the realization spreads that altitude and preparation may be insufficient as well. The sky itself seems to hold its breath. At 3:23 a.m., the first bomb bay doors open. Inside Major Robert Morgan's B-29, a mechanical whine cuts through the steady thunder of engines. The aircraft shudders as hydraulic systems engage. Bombardier Captain William Price leans closer to the Norden bomb site, his breath fogging the glass of his oxygen mask. The city below is no longer an abstract pattern of lights. Individual streets and factory roofs resolve into sharp lines beneath drifting cloud. "Bomb run," starting Price announces. Morgan adjusts the control yoke with delicate precision. He senses the entire formation settling into its final alignment, dozens of aircraft moving with silent coordination. Behind him, flight engineer Leonard McPherson monitors fuel pressure and engine temperature with unwavering concentration. You can feel the tension inside the fuselage, a tightening of nerves that no training can fully dissolve. Far below, Captain Hiroto Aizawa steadies his Mitsubishi Ki 45 at the edge of its performance envelope. Frost crawls along the canopy frame. The bomber silhouette looms ahead enormous against the faint glow of Tokyo's industrial quarter. Sergeant Minoru Kato grips the rear gun mount, eyes wide. "Range closing," Kato says. Aizawa squeezes the trigger. Machine gun fire streaks upward in bright lines that fade long before reaching the bomber. The altitude difference remains punishing. He curses under his breath, pushing the throttle further despite the engine's ragged protest. The aircraft vibrates violently, a mechanical protest against human insistence. On the ground, Lieutenant Kenjiro Takahashi watches the sky fracture with flashes of anti-aircraft bursts. He senses a shift that cannot be measured by instruments alone. Confidence has given way to something heavier, an unspoken recognition that the situation exceeds familiar boundaries. The factory siren continues its mournful wail. Workers crowd into reinforced shelters, clutching helmets and emergency kits. Some whisper prayers, others stare upward in stunned silence. At Tokyo Air Defense Command, Lieutenant Saburo Kitagawa studies updated radar returns with disbelief. The formation has penetrated deeper than expected, maintaining cohesion despite defensive fire. Telephone lines hum with overlapping reports. Coastal observers confirm additional aircraft still approaching from the west. "How many waves?" Kitagawa demands. "No estimate," a technician replies. Signals continue to multiply. The realization creeps inward like a slow tide. Strategic assumptions about range endurance and enemy capability begin to crumble beneath the weight of evidence. At 3:26 a.m., Captain Nakamura orders full citywide alarm activation. Sirens rise in a unified chorus that echoes across riverbanks and residential districts alike. Searchlights swing upward in desperate synchronization, illuminating drifting flakes of ash from anti-aircraft bursts. Inside the bomber formation, Price calls out final adjustments. "Steady. Steady. Hold this heading." Morgan's hands remain firm on the controls. Sweat trickles down his spine despite the freezing altitude. The intercom crackles with brief confirmations from other aircraft. Each voice carries the same mixture of resolve and apprehension. You can almost hear the ticking of unseen clocks, feel gravity waiting patiently for release. At 3:28 a.m., the first bombs fall. The sensation inside the aircraft is subtle at first, a sudden lightness as tons of ordnance drop away. Then the bomber lifts slightly, responding to the loss of weight. Price watches through the sighting window as dark shapes descend toward the factory complexes and rail yards. Seconds stretch into eternity. Below, Lieutenant Takahashi sees the sky erupt in brief flashes, followed by distant concussions that roll across the ground like thunder. A warehouse roof bursts apart in a bloom of flame and splintered timber. Shock waves ripple through surrounding buildings, shattering windows in glittering cascades. Direct hit! Someone gasps. Fire brigade. Lieutenant Masaru Hoshino feels the tremor through the chassis of his truck. He shouts orders as crews leap into motion, dragging hoses toward rising columns of smoke. Flames climb with frightening speed, fed by stored fuel and wooden structures packed tightly together. The air fills with sparks and drifting embers. Above, Captain Aizawa finally closes to firing range. He unleashes another burst from his forward guns. Tracer rounds arc toward the bomber's tail, striking metal with dull flashes. Inside Morgan's aircraft, the impact rattles through the fuselage. Taking fire, McPherson reports. Damage minimal. Morgan resists the urge to break formation. Discipline holds him on course. The mission demands precision more than personal safety. At Tokyo Air Defense Command, Kitagawa listens to overlapping field reports that now describe multiple fires spreading beyond initial impact zones. Fire break plans had existed on paper. In reality, narrow streets and dense housing complicate containment efforts. The turning point arrives not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of undeniable facts. Bombers have reached the capital. Bombs are falling. Defensive measures strain under pressure. Captain Nakamura lowers his binoculars, eyes reflecting searchlight glare. For the first time, he allows himself to speak the thought forming in every mind. We underestimated them. The admission carries weight far beyond the operations room. In the bomber formation, Major Morgan banks slightly to clear the target zone. Behind him, other aircraft release their payloads in measured sequence. The night sky glows with intermittent bursts of fire and smoke rising toward altitude like signals of irreversible change. On the ground, Takahashi watches flames spread along rooftops with terrifying speed. The calm that once defined the city's nights has vanished, replaced by chaos that grows with each passing minute. The belief in distance as protection has been shattered. Now a deeper fear begins to take hold. At 3:34 a.m., the fires begin to move. They do not remain where the bombs have struck. Instead, they leap from rooftop to rooftop, carried by gusts of cold wind that funnel through narrow streets like invisible hands. Burning debris drifts downward in slow spiraling arcs. The glow spreads outward in widening circles of orange and red. Lieutenant Masaru Hoshino runs beside his fire engine boots, splashing through water already pooling along the curb. His men struggle to connect hoses to hydrants whose pressure falters under sudden demand. Pumps rattle and cough. Sparks land on their uniforms and die with soft hissing sounds. "Focus on containment," Hoshino shouts, though his voice wavers. The scale of the blaze defies training scenarios. Warehouses packed with aviation fuel and timber ignite with explosive force. Flames climb walls as if drawn upward by some unseen current. Heat presses against faces like a living thing. In the operations room of Tokyo Air Defense Command, Lieutenant Saburo Kitagawa stands frozen for a moment, listening to a cascade of urgent reports. District wardens request evacuation orders. Railway supervisors demand clearance to halt inbound trains. Ammunition depots seek instructions for emergency relocation. Every decision carries risk. Every delay compounds the crisis. Prioritize industrial zones. Kitagawa orders at last. Civilian districts next. The sequence sounds logical. In reality, fires refuse to respect administrative boundaries. Above the city, Major Robert Morgan steadies his B-29 as turbulence increases. Rising columns of hot air buffet the bomber formation, causing sudden drops and jolts that strain control surfaces. Flight engineer Leonard McPherson adjusts throttle settings to compensate, updrafts getting violent. McPherson warns, Morgan nods. He can see the glow of multiple fires merging into a broad, pulsing light beneath the aircraft. The effect is both mesmerizing and grim. Bombardier William Price finished with his primary task watches through the side window as smoke boils upward in thick layers. You can feel the aircraft shiver in the shifting air currents, hear loose equipment rattle against bulkheads. At 3:38 a.m., Captain Hiroto Aizawa dives through a gap in smoke, chasing the silhouette of another bomber. His Ki-45 responds sluggishly at altitude. Engine strain becomes a constant vibration in his bones. Sergeant Minoru Kato fires a burst that flashes briefly against aluminum skin far ahead. "Too high," Kato mutters. They are always just beyond reach. Anti-aircraft gunners attempt to adjust their aim as well. Shells burst closer now, scattering fragments that streak past bomber wings like fleeting stars. One American aircraft lurches sideways, trailing smoke from an engine nacelle. Formation discipline tightens around it, escorting the damaged machine forward. Inside, the stricken bomber crew members shout over the roar of wind and mechanical alarm bells. Fire suppression systems engage. The smell of burning insulation fills the compartment. Yet even in distress, the aircraft remains airborne, its path aligned with mission parameters set hours earlier. On the ground, Lieutenant Kenjiro Takahashi helps carry crates of emergency tools toward a row of blazing storage sheds. He feels heat sear his cheeks. The roar of flames overwhelms every other sound. Somewhere nearby, a child cries out in panic. Somewhere else, masonry collapses with a thunderous crash. Waterline. Here, Takahashi calls, pointing through swirling smoke. Fire brigade crews drag hoses into position. Streams of water arc upward, only to vanish into sheets of flame. The effort feels both heroic and futile. At Tachikawa Airfield, additional fighters attempt to take off in rapid succession. Mechanics wave torches through thickening smoke that drifts across the runway. Engines misfire. One aircraft skids slightly before lifting into darkness, its pilot climbing toward a sky already crowded with danger. Tokyo's Civil Defense Headquarters receives fragmented intelligence from across the metropolitan area. Bridges clog with evacuees. Tram lines stand abandoned. Hospitals activate emergency wards as casualties begin to arrive, faces blackened by soot and shock. The realization spreads through command channels that coordination itself is breaking down. Communication networks strain under overload. Runners carry handwritten orders through streets lit by fire instead of lamps. Above, Major Morgan receives a brief transmission confirming secondary target strikes by trailing formations. The operation continues despite mounting resistance. He senses fatigue settling into his limbs, but forces himself to remain alert. "Stay focused," he tells his crew. "We are not finished." You can hear the wind screaming louder, now feel the aircraft banking through turbulent columns of heated air, rising from the inferno below. At 3:46 a.m., Captain Nakamura watches from the operations building roof as entire blocks of industrial housing ignite almost simultaneously. The pattern resembles a spreading stain of light. He realizes with cold clarity that conventional firefighting tactics cannot halt the advance. "Redirect resources," he orders into the field telephone. "Protect evacuation routes." The instruction acknowledges a grim truth. Saving structures may no longer be possible. Saving lives becomes the only achievable objective. Captain Aizawa makes one final attempt to climb into firing position. His engine sputters dangerously. Warning indicators flash across his instrument panel. He hesitates, weighing duty against survival. Below him, the city burns with increasing intensity. The assumption that distance would guarantee safety has given way to desperate improvisation in the face of catastrophe. Shock transforms into urgent decision. Confusion hardens into grim determination. The night roars on. At 3:52 a.m., Tokyo's defensive structure begins to unravel in ways no manual has anticipated. Lieutenant Saburo Kitagawa grips the edge of the operations table as new reports arrive faster than clerks can record them. Fire zones have merged across multiple districts. Evacuation corridors, once designated as safe, now glow with advancing flames. The carefully drafted response plan designed around localized strikes and controlled containment is dissolving under relentless pressure. We must shift priority, Kitagawa says, his voice hoarse. All units focus on survival and withdrawal. The words feel like a surrender to circumstances rather than an order. On the roof above him, Captain Shigeru Nakamura watches the sky with binoculars that tremble slightly in his hands. Bombers continue to pass overhead in disciplined formation, their silhouettes dark against the flickering glow below. Anti-aircraft shells still burst around them, but the pattern has become erratic. Ammunition supplies run dangerously low. A gun crew commander calls up from the street. We are nearly out of high-altitude rounds. Nakamura lowers the binoculars slowly. The realization settles like a weight in his chest. The plan had relied on sustained defensive feet. Without it, the sky belongs to the attackers. Far above, Major Robert Morgan banks his B-29 gently to align with a secondary approach vector. Turbulence grows more violent as thermal columns from the fires intensify. The bomber groans under strain rivets, ticking audibly as temperature differentials warp sections of fuselage. Flight engineer Leonard McPherson checks a series of gauges with mounting concern. Fuel margin tighter than expected, he reports. Updrafts costing power. Morgan nods once. We finish this run and withdraw. Behind him, Bombardier William Price studies the shifting terrain through a haze of smoke that now rises nearly to their altitude. Target visibility fluctuates with each gust of wind. Precision gives way to approximation. You can sense the moment when calculated strategy begins to blur into raw endurance. On the ground, Lieutenant Masaru Hoshino leads his fire brigade crew through an alley choked with debris. A collapsing warehouse wall sends a shockwave of heat and dust across the street. Hoshino pulls a younger firefighter back just as flaming timber crashes where he had been standing seconds before. Fall back to the canal, Hoshino orders. We regroup there. His plan to hold the industrial perimeter has become impossible. Water pressure drops further as multiple hydrant lines fail simultaneously. Pumps sputter and fall silent. The tools of containment are losing their effectiveness one by one. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Kenjiro Takahashi assists in guiding civilians toward a makeshift shelter beneath a railway embankment. Smoke stings his eyes. The night feels unreal, transformed into a landscape of shadows and sudden brightness. We were told this could not happen, a factory worker mutters beside him. Takahashi has no answer. The words echo his own thoughts. At Tachikawa Airfield, Captain Hiroto Aizawa brings his damaged Mitsubishi Ki 45 down with difficulty. The engine has begun to misfire at lower altitude, its earlier strain leaving permanent scars in mechanical systems. Ground crews rush forward as he climbs from the cockpit, face pale beneath streaks of soot. They fly too high, Aizawa says simply. Our interception plan is broken. The admission spreads quickly through the airfield. Pilots exchange grim looks. Some prepare to launch again regardless of odds. Others focus on refueling and rearming procedures already strained by the chaos in the capital. Above Tokyo, another wave of bombers opens its bays. The night sky briefly fills with falling shapes that catch searchlight light beams like glints of polished stone. Moments later, fresh explosions ripple across districts already struggling to survive earlier impacts. Inside Morgan's aircraft, McPherson braces against a sudden downdraft that jolts the bomber sideways. Control response lagging, he warns. Morgan tightens his grip on the yoke. Sweat beads along his temples despite the cold. The formation wavers slightly, then stabilizes through disciplined correction. Each pilot fights both enemy defenses and the volatile atmosphere created by spreading firestorms. You can feel the aircraft tremble as it slices through layers of smoke and heated air. At Tokyo Air Defense Command, communication lines begin to fail entirely in some sectors. Operators resort to runners carrying handwritten notes through corridors lit by emergency lamps. The structure of command itself starts to fragment, replaced by isolated pockets of action and reaction. Captain Nakamura steps away from the radar console and gazes toward the horizon where flames merge into a continuous band of light. The plan to preserve industrial capacity has collapsed. Now the struggle centers on preventing total annihilation of residential districts. Redirect all available units to evacuation support, he orders. The shift marks a quiet but profound turning point. On the streets, Lieutenant Hoshino watches as his exhausted crew withdraws toward the canal embankment. Firelight reflects in the dark water, turning its surface into a wavering mirror of destruction. Civilians gather along the banks, clutching bundles of possessions, eyes wide with disbelief. Above them, the bombers continue their methodical passage. The distance that once seemed protective now feels irrelevant. Altitude endurance and industrial might have reshaped the battlefield into something unrecognizable. The original plan, built on assumptions about reach and resilience, has given way to improvisation under fire. Structures burn. Orders shift. Hope narrows to survival. The collapse is no longer theoretical. It unfolds in real time beneath a sky alive with engines. At 4:07 a.m., Tokyo exists in fragments of fire and shadow. Lieutenant Saburo Kitagawa stands in the doorway of the operations room, staring at a map that no longer reflects reality. Red grease pencil marks once indicated potential strike zones and defensive coverage arcs. Now entire sections of the city glow through the windows behind him, rendering the neat geometry of planning irrelevant. We regroup command to the Western District, he orders quietly. Communications here are failing. Clerks gather documents with trembling hands. Telephones hang uselessly from their cords. Outside, the sound of distant explosions continues in irregular pulses. The attempt to restore order begins even as the scale of disorder expands. On the roof, Captain Shigeru Nakamura watches anti-aircraft crews struggle to reposition their guns. Ammunition carts arrive half-empty. Gunners load shells with mechanical determination, though their rate of fire has slowed. The sky remains full of movement, dark shapes gliding through smoke illuminated by searchlight beams that now seem tired and uncertain. He lifts his binoculars once more. A single bomber crosses directly overhead, its silhouette immense against the glow. He can see open bomb bay doors, glimpses of metallic structure catching firelight. They still come. Nakamura whispers. Far above, Major Robert Morgan leans forward in his seat, eyes narrowed against the reflected brightness rising from below. The fires have merged into a vast field of flickering light. Updrafts buffet the bomber with unpredictable force. Flight engineer Leonard McPherson fights to maintain engine stability. Power loss on 2 McPherson calls. Temporary, but we must watch it. Morgan nods. He feels the aircraft responding sluggishly as heat and turbulence alter lift characteristics. Bombarder. William Price, his primary tasks complete, scans the burning city with a mixture of professional focus and silent unease. You can sense fatigue settling into muscles and thoughts alike. The mission continues, but its cost grows more visible with every passing minute. On the ground, Lieutenant Masaru Hoshino organizes a defensive line along the canal embankment. Fire brigade crews deploy portable pumps, drawing water directly from the dark surface. Hoses snake across mud and debris toward advancing flames. Civilians assist where they can, passing buckets, clearing obstacles, guiding the injured. "Hold this line," Hoshino tells his men. "We cannot let the fire cross." The statement feels like both command and plea. Nearby, Lieutenant Kenjiro Takahashi helps a group of factory workers salvage crates of equipment from a partially collapsed storage shed. Sparks rain down from the roof, glowing briefly before vanishing into ash. The effort to preserve industrial tools has become symbolic, a gesture against total loss. "We must save what we can," Takahashi insists. Yet even as he speaks, another explosion sends a tremor through the ground. Flames surge higher, devouring timber beams with frightening speed. At Tachikawa Airfield, Captain Hiroto Aizawa prepares for a second sortie, despite his aircraft's earlier strain. Mechanics work under dim floodlights, tightening bolts and replacing damaged wiring with whatever materials remain available. Smoke drifts across the runway, reducing visibility. "We go again," Aizawa tells Sergeant Minoru Kato. Kato nods, though his expression reveals exhaustion. The decision reflects a broader attempt across the defense network to regain initiative. Fighters launch in scattered groups. Anti-aircraft batteries concentrate remaining ammunition on perceived approach corridors, and civil authorities attempt to restore communication lines through improvised radio relays. Above the inferno, the bomber formations begin to thin as aircraft complete their assigned runs. Some turn eastward toward the sea, their silhouettes fading into darkness. Others circle for secondary strikes, guided by flares and navigation signals that pierce the smoke. Inside Morgan's cockpit, McPherson watches fuel gauges creep toward critical margins. "Return, window narrowing," he warns. Morgan considers the burning expanse below, then the long journey still ahead. Duty demands adherence to mission parameters. Survival demands timely withdrawal. "We finish formation regroup and head out," Morgan decides. You can feel the tension in that choice, the awareness that each additional minute above the city invites new risk. On the canal embankment, Hoshino's defensive line begins to falter as wind shifts direction. Flames leap across narrow gaps, igniting rooftops on the far side of the water. Firefighters scramble to reposition pumps. Civilians scatter, clutching bundles of belongings that now seem pitifully small against the scale of destruction. Lieutenant Takahashi watches as a section of factory wall collapses inward with a roar. The crates he helped move moments earlier vanish beneath falling debris. The attempt to preserve material resources feels increasingly futile. At Tokyo, Air Defense Command's temporary relocation point Kitagawa receives fragmented confirmation that some railway lines remain operational. He orders evacuation trains dispatched despite uncertainty about track conditions. "We recover what we can," he says to a subordinate officer, "even if it is only people." The words carry a quiet resignation. In the sky, Captain Aizawa climbs once more toward the bomber stream. His aircraft responds sluggishly. He senses the futility of interception at this stage, yet presses on out of duty and pride. Searchlights catch his fighter briefly, then release it back into darkness. The attempt to recover control unfolds simultaneously across air and ground. Each effort meets resistance from fire smoke and the relentless momentum of events already set in motion. Tokyo burns. Plans are revised. Resources are stretched thin. The effort to reclaim what has been lost continues, even as the night reveals how little remains within reach. At 4:28 a.m., The eastern horizon begins to pale. The first hint of approaching dawn filters through layers of smoke, turning the sky above Tokyo into a dim canvas of gray and orange. Flames still rage across industrial districts and residential blocks alike, but the darkness that once concealed their full extent is slowly lifting. Shapes emerge from shadow. Entire streets appear as blackened corridors between smoldering ruins. Lieutenant Saburo Kitagawa stands on the steps of the temporary command post in the Western District, staring toward the glow. He has not slept. Soot stains the cuffs of his uniform. Messages arrive less frequently now, not because the situation has improved, but because many communication lines have simply fallen silent. "How far has it spread?" he asks a field officer. The man hesitates. "Beyond containment," he replies at last. The words carry finality. Plans to isolate fires within designated zones have failed. Efforts to preserve industrial production capacity have failed. The belief that defensive depth and distance would prevent such devastation has failed. On a nearby rooftop, Captain Shigeru Nakamura lowers his binoculars and rubs his eyes. The bomber stream has begun to thin noticeably. Anti-aircraft guns fire sporadically, conserving their last shells. Searchlights flicker as generators run low on fuel. He watches a final formation of B-29 aircraft pass overhead engines, droning with mechanical indifference. Their silhouettes are stark against the brightening sky. "They came across the ocean," Nakamura murmurs more to himself than anyone else. They reach the heart of the capital. Far above, Major Robert Morgan guides his bomber eastward away from the burning city. The return course stretches across a horizon still veiled in smoke. Flight engineer Leonard McPherson checks fuel reserves one more time. "We make it if winds hold," McPherson says. Morgan nods. He glances back through the side window. What he sees is no longer a collection of isolated fires, but a continuous expanse of destruction, glowing even in the growing light of dawn. Bombardier. William Price leans silently against the fuselage. His mission tasks are complete, yet the image below imprints itself upon his memory with unsettling clarity. You can feel the aircraft steady as it leaves the turbulent air above the inferno. The engines settle into a more even rhythm. Yet inside the crew compartment, no one relaxes. On the ground, Lieutenant Masaru Hoshino and his exhausted fire brigade crew stand along the canal embankment, watching flames consume the far bank. Water pumps lie silent beside them. Hoses coil across mud like lifeless serpents. Some firefighters sink to their knees, faces streaked with sweat and ash. "We could not stop it," one man whispers. Hoshino says nothing. He has spent hours issuing orders, redirecting efforts, urging courage. Now he simply observes the unstoppable advance of fire as dawn reveals the true scale of loss. Nearby, Lieutenant Kenjiro Takahashi helps guide a column of civilians toward an evacuation train waiting on a soot-covered platform. Mothers clutch children. Elderly men lean on makeshift canes. The air smells of smoke and damp wood. Somewhere in the distance, a factory roof collapses with a hollow boom. A young worker turns to Takahashi. "Will they come again?" he asks. Takahashi cannot answer. For the first time, he considers that the night's events may not be an isolated incident, but a harbinger of something larger. At Tachikawa Airfield, Captain Hiroto Aizawa lands his fighter for the second time. The aircraft shudders to a halt amid drifting smoke. Mechanics approach cautiously. He removes his helmet and stares toward the distant glow on the horizon. "We could not reach them," he says. "Our machines were not built for this." The admission spreads among pilots gathered near the hangars. Conversations fall quiet. The realization is shared and unspoken. In the temporary command center, Kitagawa receives a final consolidated report from multiple districts. Casualties are mounting. Industrial output has been crippled in key sectors. Firebreak strategies have proven insufficient against coordinated high-altitude bombing. He folds the paper slowly, hands trembling despite his effort to remain composed. This changes everything, he says. You can sense the moment when strategic belief yields to undeniable evidence. The ocean is no longer a protective moat. Altitude is no longer an insurmountable barrier. Industrial strength alone cannot shield a nation from determined attack. As dawn brightens, the bomber formations recede toward the eastern sky. Their engine noise fades into distant echoes. Silence returns in uneven patches, broken only by the crackle of flames and the murmur of displaced families gathering along evacuation routes. Captain Nakamura watches the last aircraft disappear beyond sight. The realization settles fully into his thoughts. The war has reached home. At 5:12 a.m., the sun rises through smoke. Its light appears dull and distorted, filtered by layers of ash that drift slowly across the wounded skyline of Tokyo. What had been night filled with engines and explosions becomes morning filled with silence broken only by distant crackling and the groan of collapsing beams. Entire neighborhoods lie reduced to blackened frameworks. Streets, once crowded with trams and bicycles, now hold only scattered debris and the cautious footsteps of those searching for survivors. Lieutenant Saburo Kitagawa walks through the courtyard of the temporary command post with the stiffness of a man who has aged years in a single night. Clerks move around him carrying bundles of reports. Many of the documents contain only partial information. Entire districts have yet to respond. He pauses beside a field telephone that emits nothing but a hollow hiss. "We begin assessment," he says quietly to the officers gathered nearby. Immediate restoration of coordination is essential. The words sound procedural, yet every face reflects the same understanding. Restoration will take time that the war may not allow. On a rooftop overlooking the Sumida River, Captain Shigeru Nakamura surveys the aftermath with binoculars that now feel heavier than before. Smoke rises in columns that twist slowly into the morning sky. Searchlight towers stand abandoned, their beams extinguished. Anti-aircraft guns sit silent beside empty ammunition crates. He lowers the lenses and exhales. During the night, he had watched formation after formation pass overhead with mechanical precision. Now only the consequences remain. "They prove the distance means nothing," he murmurs. Far to the east, Major Robert Morgan guides his B-29 across open water. The aircraft vibrates gently in calmer air. Fuel gauges hover near the lower limits of safety. Flight engineer Leonard McPherson watches them with unwavering focus. "We will reach base," McPherson says at last. Morgan nods. He glances back one final time at the fading horizon where smoke still smudges the sky above Japan. The mission has altered more than physical terrain. It has reshaped assumptions held by both sides. Inside the bomber, Bombardier William Price removes his oxygen mask and breathes deeply. The scent of heated metal and fuel lingers. He says nothing yet. The memory of fire spreading through city blocks settles into his thoughts with lasting weight. On the ground, Lieutenant Masaru Hoshino leads his fire brigade crew through streets where embers still glow beneath collapsed rooftops. They move carefully, listening for the faint cries of trapped civilians. Portable pumps are reassembled where possible. Buckets of water are passed hand to hand. A woman kneels beside the ruins of her home, clutching a scorched photograph. Hoshino pauses, uncertain how to offer comfort. The tools of his profession feel inadequate against grief, measured in lives rather than structures. Nearby, Lieutenant Kenjiro Takahashi supervises the loading of injured workers onto evacuation trains. Medical teams improvise treatment stations beneath canvas tops. The platform smells of antiseptic and smoke. As the locomotive begins to move, its whistle sounds thin and mournful. Takahashi watches until the train disappears into the haze. He recalls his earlier certainty that the city lay beyond reach of enemy bombers. That belief now seems distant, almost unreal. At Tachikawa Airfield, Captain Hiroto Aizawa sits on an ammunition crate while mechanics inspect his damaged fighter. He runs a hand along the scarred metal of the fuselage. The aircraft had carried him into darkness and back again, yet had never truly closed the distance to the enemy. "Our defenses must change," he says to Sergeant Minoru Kato. Kato nods, eyes fixed on the horizon where smoke still rises in slow spirals. Across Tokyo, civil authorities begin to tally losses. Factory output has been interrupted. Rail networks require urgent repair. Housing shortages grow as thousands seek temporary shelter. Communication lines are restored in fragments. Each new report adds weight to a realization already understood in silence. Captain Nakamura descends from the rooftop and walks through streets lined with exhausted gun crews. He exchanges brief nods with men who have fired until their barrels glowed. Their expressions reveal a shared recognition. The war has crossed a threshold that cannot be reversed. In the distance, church bells begin to ring, not in celebration, but in solemn acknowledgement of survival. Smoke drifts across their sound, softening its clarity. Dawn continues to brighten, revealing more damage with every passing minute. High above the Pacific, Major Morgan and his crew maintain course toward home. The engines drone with steady persistence. The aircraft carries no bombs now, only the memory of fire, and the knowledge that distance no longer shields any nation completely. Back in Tokyo, Lieutenant Kitagawa studies a final preliminary summary. He folds it carefully and places it inside his coat pocket. There will be new plans, new strategies, new attempts to adapt. Yet none can erase what has already happened. He steps outside into the morning light and looks toward the horizon where smoke and sun merge into a hazy line. The understanding settles fully at last. It is too late to change the outcome of this night.